Here we are in October for our third Thursday training. And before we jump in, let's pray. Holy and loving God, we're grateful for the ways you see us through each and every day, the ways you walk alongside us and encourage us so that we can grow in love for you and love for one another. Be with us in this time as we talk about policies and what's required and why they're required. Remind us that we're called to create places where all people can come and be cared for. And sometimes in this world, that means policies. So guide us, we pray, today and every day. Amen. All right. It's going to be a long-running series, I'm afraid, talking about the required policies. So I'm going to share my screen a bit, starting with, let's make sure I have the right document showing. I've been working on a lot of documents today. Here we go. Here's the right document. Starting with a document kind of looking at the required policies and some of the resources that are available. And I will make this available as a PDF when we're done. So you may have heard me say before, the Book of Order changed after our last General Assembly, and the changes were approved by a majority of the presbyteries. And so now in G 30106, this is our language, that each council shall, and you may remember, shall is the Presbyterian word for you have to, no wiggle room, shall develop a manual of administrative operations that will specify the form and guide the work of mission in that council. All councils shall adopt and implement the following policies: a sexual misconduct policy, a harassment policy, a child and youth protection policy, and an anti-racism policy. Each council's policy shall include requirements for boundary training, which includes the topic of sexual misconduct and child sexual abuse prevention training for its members at least every 36 months. So this paragraph was put together with a variety of amendments, and partially that results in something that isn't entirely clear. Is it just because the second sentence, it's not clear if that applies to each of the policies named or only some policies. For application's sake, we are understanding that the requirements for boundary training around sexual misconduct and child sexual abuse prevention are appropriately to be found in the misconduct prevention policies and not in the anti-racism policy. So, for what that's worth. But there is that requirement of training for its members. And that means the members of a congregation, in our case, presbytery, etc. So I pulled out the required pieces: sexual misconduct, harassment, child and youth protection, anti-racism policy, and then the requirement for training. So you can see those listed there. We're going to spend some time checking out the resources that are available, because that's a lot. That's a lot for any of us. It's a lot for any session to come up with. I'm in the process of revising and reviewing the presbytery's policies. It's a lot. So we're going to look at some general resources from the PCUSA A Corporation, which is the administrative arm of our denomination. We're going to look at a specific web page called Creating Safe Ministries. And under Safe Ministries, and we'll see this in a minute, we see different tiles around making a report, prevention, rebuilding trust after an event, resources, create policies, that's important, definitions, an emergency plan, and sample policies. So really helpful. Then we're also going to take a look at some of the resources available through the insurance board. This is a common insurance company for churches. They specialize in church insurance, and they have their Safety Central, but especially for that last requirement, they offer online learning. So we're going to touch on these somewhat quickly, but this document, which I'll email out afterwards, along with the link to this video, has the live links for you. So we are going, well, before I move to the websites, any questions at this point?
When does the requirement actually start? Or is it
Kind of,
in effect now?
it's kind of in effect now.
Okay.
There's a grace period. And so probably what we'll do is at next year's session minutes review, I will be asking for evidence either of policies that have been approved or policies in progress.
Okay.
Yeah.
And am I clear that you said congregation members need to be included in training?
That's the way it's worded. Yeah. Yeah. And so part of the prevention policies will be determining what that looks like. And I'll say now, and you may hear me say it again, for me, one of the keys in setting any of these policies is making sure that you are setting requirements that you can fulfill. A lot of this, as you know, it's driven in part because we want to create safe and sacred spaces. We want to create places where people can enter and be free of harm. And churches can be sued for all they're worth when harm occurs. And so if you have a policy and you don't follow the requirements in your policy, that opens you up to additional levels of liability. So it's really important. And working with your insurance company is always a good idea, but it's really important not to set requirements that you know you won't be able to fulfill. So if you know that your beloved 80-year-old Sunday school teacher will never say yes to a background check, even though that is recommended and good practice for anyone dealing with children, you gotta navigate that. And you can't do it by exempting one person. So be sure to adopt policies that you can actually live into. Okay, that's my pitch for that. Now we're going to start looking at some of these.
As far as that's concerned, back in Jersey, one of the session records reviews that I was attending, the records that I read, their second session records included under the Christian education that, you know, such and such a trip happened on such and such a date, and every vehicle had 2 adults, and like whatever their rules were, they were in their minutes.
Yeah, that's good practice. That's good practice. And for instance, I need to review the presbytery's child protection policy, or whatever we've called it, because we do sponsor presbytery-wide events for youth, usually going to like Massanetta or Montreat or something like Triennium. And I don't know if we've pulled out our policy and said, are we following our guidelines for this? I do know all the adults have gone through background checks because that's pretty standard for us. But yeah, you have to know what your policy is and you have to apply it. Oh, but first you have to have a policy. Yay! So this is the A Corporation website under their resources page. So A Corporation, like I said, is the administrative arm of the Presbyterian Church USA. And they, among other things, deal with all the legal stuff, legal, human resources. And you see, so you can see on this page, and this link is on that document I'll send out, their internal policies, child, youth, vulnerable adult policy, ethics policies, real estate policies. You can see their finance and accounting resources, their human resources. But then here, under legal services and risk management resources, this is where the things that will be most helpful for our congregations will be found, such as an annual to-do list. I'm going to spend a different Third Thursday training just looking at that. But many of these resources are helpful. A business continuity checklist, leases, church lease and covenant issues. Okay. So we're going to take a look specifically at this Creating Safe Ministries page. But I wanted you to see the rest of these resources that are available, like guidelines on live streaming, hacking, phishing. So there are some good things in this resource list that you can turn to and take a look at. And then they have their own legal resource manual, which I hope and pray. It's never a good thing when you need to pull out a legal resource manual, but it's there if you need it. Okay. All right, so let's take a look at the Creating Safe Churches. Yep, that's what you can see. Creating Safe Ministries page. And again, this is a page of the PCUSA, created for the PCUSA. And here you have those 8 buttons that I mentioned before. Each button will have different resources, different things that you can draw on. So if you don't have a policy yet, checking out the Create Policies button or the Sample Policies button can be a good place to start. Yeah. So let's take a look first at their Resources button. And so you see all of the pieces, all of the external resources linked there. So these are the resources that you can turn to kind of on the continuum from beginning to work on a policy through having something happen or having a complaint filed. So you see Help for Rebuilding Trust, Healing Communities Resource Guide, which we hope we never, ever, ever have to use, but sometimes we do. Help for Creating Policies. So here's that Creating Child and Youth Protection Policies. There are some publications. So if part of the work that you identify is helping to raise awareness, if you have a lot of people saying, why do we need this? We're the church. First, you could, refer them to the daily news cycle and how many churches are liable for terrible misconduct. But second, there are these resources to help create that theological foundation, the biblical foundation for why we need policies that are meant to protect. There are liturgical resources, so things that you could weave into worship if you wanted to help raise awareness through a worship service. Our own statements and resources related to abuse and misconduct. So lots of things right here on that resources page. Let's take a real quick look at the Create Policies page. And this language has not been updated yet, but this page is here to help us create the policies that are mandated. And again, a list of resources that can be used. They also lift up insurance board resources, and we'll take a look at that in a minute. Some language around why, Yeah, so this page gives you some more of that foundational work and then helps you begin to work on what a policy could be, the questions to consider, the 3 phases to be addressed, what should go into a policy. It can feel like a lot, which is why, back to the top, they offer, thanks be to God, sample policies. So these need to be, there need to be more robust policies. Right now, these are not actual policies related to Safe Church. The intention, from what I have been told, is that they will be adding things here, but for now, actually, their sample policies don't go further than that, which I thought they did. Okay, that's the Safe Ministries. Let's take a look at the insurance board, because the insurance board will have more to offer, and I have to. Okay, so like I said, the insurance board primarily insures faith organizations. And so if you go to insuranceboard.org, you'll find on their website these 2 things, Safety Central and online learning. We're going to start with Safety Central. And as you see, it is unique source of safety, liability, and insurance articles. And so in the Safety Central page, you can see trending topics because issues around safety change as technology changes. Resources. There's a place to get help, ask Safety Central. And you can see there are different sets of resources for different topics. So today we're talking a lot about abuse prevention, but if you're having trouble with a lot of phishing, a lot of cybersecurity issues, if people are texting and pretending they're your pastor and asking for gift cards, might be good to check this one out too, Cybersecurity Toolkit. If you go down, I want these to be on your radar. So this is a fantastic collection of resources provided by a company whose job is to mitigate harm. They're an insurance company. So it's in their interest to help us not have to file a claim. I mean, that's bottom line stuff. So good property resources, and all of our churches with property, it's good to have especially emergency preparedness things in place. It's not required by the Book of Order, but it's smart to have. People resources, and so here you'll find that abuse prevention, stuff about youth safety, and so this is where you would go to really dig into safe church policies. And then other things like planning an event and volunteer management. So that can be super helpful. And then you can ask for other resources, which is a gift, because sometimes you need something and it's not quite right. So the other thing they offer, which is very helpful given that requirement for training, is their online learning portal. Free. You can't get much better than that. And if you require training through an insurance provider, it should meet any of the reasonable requirements. So lots of categories, upcoming webcasts. So building a culture of protection. That might even be a good place to start if you need to create a policy. And so on this page, you can find all of the things that they have done. Here's general safety, abuse prevention. So convicted offenders in your congregation, that could be a training video. This is a place to go for that education requirement, but also as you are working on your own policy. All right. That's a lot of information thrown at you in a short period of time. But mostly I wanted to give you access to resources. So questions.
I guess having been through the child protection stuff, the pieces, where do we go on the anti-racism and the other things that got added to the list,
Yeah.
which none of these resources seem to have yet addressed.
Yeah. So I put together a PowerPoint for the anti-racism policy. And so that's available from our August 3rd Thursday. And there are some other places that provide some guidance. Let me see if I can pull those up. So one of the places for the anti-racism pieces would be the Matthew 25 website. Let's see if I can find that.
So let's just kick it up a level in terms of that. For child safety protection, background checks, how many people, who can drive, all that kind of stuff
Yeah.
is involved. On the anti-racism, are we looking for a statement of not here, no way, no how? I mean, is that what we're kind of looking for, a policy statement, or does it need to get more nitty gritty?
So I would say a lot of that depends on where the church is at. So if a church really just wants to be able to say we're not going to discriminate based on anything, then that meets the requirement. For a lot of our churches, they're wanting to go deeper. They're wanting to deal with history. They're wanting to add the learning and training component. And so some churches adopt policies that have things like in Black History Month in February, worship and educational opportunities will focus on anti-racism efforts, or we will make an intentionally seek to honor cultures other than the dominant culture when those celebrations occur in the calendar, things like that. And so they create policies that include action as well as we won't do it here. And that's really up to the church. And again, it's for me, it's the same advice. If you know that it would be a fight in your church to even mention Black History Month, then trying to create a policy that requires broad action isn't probably a first step. A first step may be, why is this the church's business? And so there's some good Presbyterian resources, some good Bible studies, study on the Confession of Belhar. So there are good ways to enter into that conversation too. And so even writing that policy may be a bit of a journey. In the August training, I did sample some other churches' websites across the denomination so people could see different levels. Some churches had a whole section on their website dedicated to anti-racism efforts. Other churches had a simple statement. We believe we're called to love everybody, so we're going to love everybody and everything in between.
Hey, Cindy.
Yeah.
And I'm here with Tammy now, so
Hey.
Hi, Cindy.
Good to see you.
Yeah, so actually the other kind of question that I have is, are any of these resources geared around, and I think some of these very basic examples I think would be very helpful to at least see. But do any of them involve kind of financial responsibilities and kind of setting up healthy financial practices? Um,
Yeah, there'll definitely be some of those resources, both on the A Corporation page and the insurance board will have things around that. And the Book of Order has some language too, which can be helpful, that has some of that shall language about how money shall be handled.
Okay, all right. And when it comes to the training, I know you were sharing how, particularly around child safety, there's a training component that's really
Mhm.
expected at this point. Um, who does that training and what does that look like?
Well, that depends, and that's why that insurance board site where they offer free training can be really, really helpful. So you could use a free training, and depending on who your insurance company is, you may have access to more options. Your insurance company may be willing to do a training. You may have people in your congregation who professionally are equipped to do that. So I wouldn't discount the possibility of somebody who's known being able to offer that. I could envision the presbytery offering a kind of a come one, come all kind of a training, but we would require that churches still track their own compliance. Like we can't track compliance of church members.
Right, right. I've often been a advocate saying, we need boundary training for churches as well as for clergy.
Yeah, yeah.
But at the same time, yeah, it gets complicated. So,
So Court, I'll make you this offer. At our session meeting last night, we had asked everybody to do an online training on child sexual use.
mhm.
And it's one of those where you got to stay on the page so long. And so we're looking at whether we can get some live training. And if we do, I'll make sure you guys get invited.
Thank you. That would be
Yeah,
beautiful.
that's great.
Yeah, yeah.
That, and that's the other thing we can do is collaborate.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Uh, yeah.
Just to clarify, the expectation around the training is specific to child safety. Is that right? It's not to the anti-racism or harassment piece,
I
or
would,
am I incorrect?
yeah, and that's where
It's a little,
it's a little weird, but it says boundary training, which includes the topic of sexual misconduct, comma, and child sexual abuse prevention training at least every 36 months. So I would say that the anti-racism policy is not included in that language, but it doesn't seem unreasonable to want to include boundary and misconduct training.
that's helpful. Sorry, my computer was doing something weird. So
Okay.
we're making some funny, my funny faces were not meant towards you.
Wouldn't be the first time.
Why should your computer be any different than anybody else's? In terms of doing funny things at times.
It's true. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Yeah, and so I'm sorry that there aren't more. I thought there were more sample policies on that one page.
Could you read just a couple of sample policies? This sounds weird, but until we get into the weeds on this thing, I feel like we're not going to really,
Mhm.
I want to make use of this time to really kind of, kick the tires on this, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Is that possible to,
Yeah, if you would like.
I mean, I
So
don't want to,
Let's go back to the insurance board. Let me see. Policies. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen again. And I'm back on the insurance board website under resources. And so, and here they've got a safe conduct policy, sample policy. You can do a self-assessment, which might be not helpful. They offer background screening, and so the Presbytery is currently using Presidium for both online training for our required boundary training for ruling elders who serve at the Presbytery level and teaching elders. And so we're using basically this resource. And then the online training pieces again. So let's take a look at this sample policy. And as you see, guidance provided by Presidium, which is the group the Presbytery is using for training. So they say that safe conduct includes sexual harassment, professional boundaries, sexual orientation, bullying, and exploitation of vulnerable adults. Even though the template is focused primarily on child abuse prevention. So it has, and here's an important thing, the congregational approval piece, having the congregation buy in. And then it talks about policy language, like shall, the Presbyterian shall, and not should. And so this sample policy is exhaustive, which is great because it gives you a sense of all of the kinds of things to think about. So in this statement of table of contexts, it includes general definitions, code of conduct, policies for working with youth, which include, as you see, physical contact, verbal interactions, one-on-one interactions, off-site contact, electronic communication, which is really important, gift giving. How do you screen and select leaders to work with youth and vulnerable adults? What is the training? What is the monitoring and supervision? This is one of the pieces that is essential, the responding piece. How will you respond? What is the process if somebody either comes forward and says, I was harmed, or someone comes forward and says, I think there's harm going on? What is your process? And some of that will be informed by the Book of Order and the church discipline section, which sets out the Presbyterian process. But you want your session and the leaders in the congregation to know what is the internal process. How does that happen? This piece, a registered sex offender policy, I'm a firm believer that when we say all are welcome, we need to try to mean it, but that doesn't mean that we welcome everybody without being wise, right? Jesus told us to be wise as serpents. And so if there's somebody who's a registered offender who is looking for a church home, how will you sensitively, but also responsibly create welcome? And so I appreciate that they provide a sample for a way, and maybe the best way, but at least a way to create that path. And then this acknowledgement, the acknowledgement, so if somebody is a Sunday school teacher, somebody is working with youth or vulnerable adults, that record that they have received the church's policy and they agree to abide by it. And then those appendices. Any piece in particular you'd like to take a closer look at?
Well, I guess I'll speak up to say, is there a very basic, I mean, I know that sounds, not trying to
No,
dumb things down here, but
a really
but
basic one. No, I hear you. I hear you.
something that's, yeah, yeah, I'm just kind of curious if that is out there. If it is, that's great. Not to say that we don't want ultimately these other,
No,
pieces of it, but
I appreciate that. And we certainly have churches that don't have children now. That's not to say they might not in the future. We certainly have churches that don't offer Sunday school, and any young people stay in worship. So having a simpler policy can make some sense. I will say that most of the resources are probably going to default to being more exhaustive than not. Because that way,
yeah, just the nature of it all. I get it.
yeah.
Okay, all right.
But,
Well, it was
yeah.
worth a try, and it's okay. It's all right. I mean, this is only one page. It's not like it's an impossible
Yeah.
feat here.
And so here are again, I'll share this piece again, which may help. Maybe the essential pieces of a policy. So one or two paragraph purpose. What is the purpose of it? What is the prohibited behavior? So will you know it when you see it? How will you prevent it? What is that reporting process? How do you respond? How do you respond to allegations? So these pieces in simple form would create a simple policy.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, and I guess I'll repeat it because I don't know that. Well, I'll just, one of the things that you already said was that, you know, it's more important really to put in a policy that is uh, that we're not overdoing it in such a way where we're creating our own problems for ourselves if
Yes.
we create all these hurdles that we then cannot jump over or jump through. So it's almost better not to put things in that are going to down the road trip us up and cause problems with insurance companies and who knows what else in legalities.
Yeah. One of the things that might be helpful to note, I'm 99.9% positive on the statement I'm about to make, is that all clergy are mandated reporters. But I also believe that elders who are on session would also be considered mandated reporters as leaders within a congregation. So for our elders to be aware that that there are also legal responsibilities alongside of our faith community responsibilities. And so if there is a child and a complaint is made, we've got the church process, but anytime we're talking about a child, a minor, or a vulnerable adult, it's a legal process as well. Yeah.
Just so I'm clear on this, as I'm kind of getting to know the system here, obviously I would be on the phone to you probably pretty darn quick. But what officially, how does this chain of command work going up
Yeah, so in the Presbyterian Church, if usually if there's a complaint, someone reaches out to me, that's part of what my job covers. For our internal judicial process, because we have our own judicial process, that begins when an allegation or a complaint is received in writing. And so for us, that's the precipitating event. So until I receive something in writing, the other pieces don't really follow. So often what will happen is I'll get a phone call or an email and I'll have a conversation with somebody. And sometimes that conversation is just an opportunity to talk through different ways of approaching an issue, because sometimes it's an issue that doesn't require or rise to the level of needing to go through our process. No matter the case, I always let them decide. That's not my decision to make. That's the person who is coming with a question about harm. They get to make that decision. And I really work hard to be clear about that. Once something's received in writing, well, then we've got a process. And that process includes creating an investigating committee to literally investigate, to look into the nature of the complaint. The Presbytery has a permanent judicial commission, which are people elected to serve on essentially our court. Depending on the nature of the allegation, the permanent judicial commission may have a subset meet to decide whether administrative leave is required if the complaint is against a pastor and creates a situation where the pastor should not be present during the investigative process. It's a lot like
Yeah.
civil process. Some people will say that the country's constitution and judicial setup is based in large part on what Presbyterians have done, and there's certainly some mirroring pieces. Yeah,
But we've got some obligations to the state.
we do have obligations to the state, and so sometimes what'll happen is like an investigating committee might get started, realize that actually the complaint includes impact on a minor or vulnerable adult, and at that point is obligated to inform authorities. And then the investigating process usually will go on hold while the civil process plays out. That's when it gets complicated.
Sure.
Yeah. But we have, we have our own definitions of due process, our own standards for timelines. What are the timelines that are required so things can't just languish?
Yeah.
All of that is in that church discipline section of the Book of Order.
Right.
But it seems to me that kind of court at the church level, the important thing is for session members to understand that if somebody says to them, this bad thing happened to my kid at church, that they can't let it drop.
That's right.
They can't treat it just as, oh, somebody's gossiping with them.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Yeah. If it's harm, then there's no such thing as confidentiality.
Yeah.
Is what it boils down to in those situations. And the other thing a session isn't always aware of is for our judicial process and our church discipline, if it's a church member, an elder in the church, or just a member of the church, it's the session that deals with the complaint. And I would certainly provide training and coaching and support, but members of the church, the authority resides in the session to handle
Right.
unless there's harm to to a minor or vulnerable adult. It's people who are members of the presbytery, ministers, who come under the presbytery's judicial process. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I've even sat in on, with the UCC side of things. I'm very familiar with how we deal with it on that side. So it's helpful to hear how it's a little bit different, but mostly the same.
Yeah, and
Presbytery.
actually, so the church discipline section is brand new. It replaced what was the rules of discipline. So in 2024, my plan is to have a training on that. But I thought we'd start with our required policies first. Any other questions?
Can you go back to the list of policies, the very beginning?
I sure can. I think I can. Clearly, Zoom doesn't agree with me. Let's try that again. There you are. Yeah, so there's the language from the Book of Order and then the policies it names. What I'm going to do at the presbytery level, our misconduct prevention policy already has language about harassment. I'm going to make sure that that is robust enough, but my argument will be that one policy for misconduct prevention is enough to cover both sexual misconduct and harassment prevention.
So if I look at that, we're thinking sexual misconduct and harassment policy is adult oriented.
Yeah. And so they may have elements of children, vulnerable adults. And so that's the distinction. The child and youth protection policy is more about what is in place, what are our policies to provide for protection, where the misconduct prevention policies are, this is what misconduct is, and specifically talking about misconduct prevention, where child protection policy would have things like the background checks for anyone dealing with youth. There wouldn't be an equivalent in a misconduct prevention policy. So those would be some of the differences. And if you've got a child and youth protection policy that defines what harm is, then you could reference that in the misconduct prevention policy, or in the protection policy, you could reference the fuller misconduct prevention policy. If you do that, you want to be sure that both are provided and both are signed for in that acknowledgement document. Does that make sense? There's going to be some overlap. Yeah. The things we didn't know we had to become more expert at.
Cindy, it's kind of when NFOG came, it was let's slim down the Book of Order, make things simpler for small churches and that sort. And then now it's let's put these things back.
Yes, and there are,
and all for good reasons.
For good reasons. And there are some things still. I'm serving in a General Assembly Special Committee right now, and we're looking at taking some things out because there are things that are more appropriate to the standing rules of the General Assembly and not to the Book of Order of the General Assembly. But yeah. All right, I'm going to stop our recording.